backgrounds to really have an effective implementation strategy. And so we've highlighted a few organizations in the Climate Action Plan, like Community Resource Project, which has been a great partner for a number of years doing energy efficiency retrofits and electrification work in disadvantaged communities of the county. Others include the Sacramento Tree Foundation. They've been a great partner for decades with Sacramento County in planting trees in under-resourced and disadvantaged communities. We want to see that partnership continue. And those are just a couple of examples, and the list could be endless, but really important to have that ongoing coordination. The other three bullets are more routine work that we're going to be doing, implementing and adjusting the Climate Action Plan when we need to, based on the performance that we see, updating that inventory on a regular basis every 2 years at a minimum. And then finally, providing updates. This gets to regularly reporting to our partners throughout the region, not just Sacramento County, but also to the cities and the regional planning agencies, and to those community-based organizations that need to know what's going on, how we're doing, how we're performing. Are there new best practices that we can implement as we go along? And then this last slide is really probably the most important as it relates to equity. And so this is where I want to highlight some of the other plans the county has. It's not all in the Climate Action Plan, but we have an environmental justice element of the county's general plan. That's the blueprint for how the county seeks to grow over time. And so that environmental justice element touches on a lot of topics related to the county's disadvantaged communities. And one of those policies that we intentionally put in the EJ element is this, what's on the screen, EJ 28. It's the policy of Sacramento County that the programs that are developed as part of the Climate Action Plan, and that could include incentive programs, fee mitigation programs, adaptation resiliency programs, all of those need to prioritize the investment in the county's environmental justice communities. And then Lynn touched on this in her introduction, but we know as staff that those inequities exist, and they have existed for decades. And so we need to, as part of implementation of not just the CAP, but other county programs, prioritizing the investment in those communities to restore equity, to build those communities up in the way that they can thrive again. And that can happen through a number of different mechanisms. It could be through prioritizing infill development. And that means, focusing on the existing urban area of the county where we want to see investment. We want to see those communities thrive again, making those land use decisions that can really make that happen for those communities. It means providing greater policy support for transit, working again in partnership with SAC-RT, and even advocating for additional funding to bring to bear to provide, excuse me, more robust transit opportunities in those communities, making those first mile, last mile connections, even micro transit, the on-demand work that RT is doing is one example of that. We all know about the affordable housing crisis. We've got the housing element that was approved recently by the board. Excuse me, that has a number of programs in it that seek to promote affordable housing in what are called high resource or moderate resource areas. Those are areas that have higher income levels where we can integrate and connect the low income workers in those communities that can be better integrated and perhaps achieve upward mobility for folks in those situations. And then partnership opportunities, that just reiterates what I said on the previous slide, the importance of multiple organizations working together to achieve the common goal around climate change is really about building on the strengths of each other, what we know others can do, what we know county staff can do, how can we all achieve that common goal? And then finally, reiterating the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force. That's one other path that folks can have an avenue toward advocacy, toward making an effective implementation work around the Climate Action Plan. And that concludes my presentation. I'm going to go back to the first slide real quick so that folks who didn't get a chance to jot down my contact information can do that. And I'll pause here.
Thank you so much, Todd. That was great. Really appreciate the great work that you're doing in relation to working with the community and within all areas of the county to really strengthen our partnerships and move this work forward. So next, as we discussed earlier, is Naila Pope Harden, who's the Executive Director, of Climate Plan. Hi, happy to have you.
Thank you. Okay, so I was told that for my background to look right for you guys, it has to look wrong for me. Is that correct? So it looks right for you guys? Who understands this Zoom world still? All right, so I deeply apologize for a few thyou One, I am coming into this conversation a little climate pessimistic. Just meaning like some days when I do climate change work, it's like you get the reports that like, you know, we only have so long to intervene, and it just feels like, for what? So you guys are unfortunately getting me in one of those moments, but I think sometimes in the pessimism, it's easier to find light. So hopefully that leads to a fruitful conversation. What I would love to know is if folks in the chat are willing, just like on a scale from like 1 to 10, 1 being like, you have heard of climate change, but like, do not understand any of the concepts, and 10, like Greta Thunberg learned everything from you. Like, where do you think you fall in the climate change spectrum? Just so I can like better frame my comments. Okay, perfect. We have a lot of like mid-range folks. Okay. Hi, mid-range folks. Okay, that's exciting. So let me screen share really quick and and give you guys my spiel. Can you guys see my screen?
No, not yet.
Okay. Let's see. We're sharing. And then I need to move everything out of the way so I can click present. Oh gosh. You guys, how long have we been doing Zoom, and like what is going on? Hold on. So sorry, everyone. Again, climate pessimism also has to do with like Zoom.
It's okay. We are waiting with bated breath to hear from you.
There we go. All right. Nope, that's my LinkedIn. Okay, well, this presentation doesn't want to present. I'm Naila Pope Harden. I'm the Executive Director of Climate Plan. Climate Plan is a statewide organization that we have about 60 partners across the state that are some really small mom and pop organizations. So I like to call like, this isn't a real organization, but might as well be, like the Left Turn Association of Santa Clara County is a member of Climate Plan. And we also have some of the big national organizations like NRDC, Greenlining, Policy Link that are members of the Climate Plan Network. One of the things that we do is we work at the intersections of transportation, land use, housing, and environmental justice. So you can't, and we also have a lot of public health organizations that are members as well. what we believe is you can't talk about transportation and create transportation policy without also then thinking about housing. And you can't talk about transportation and housing without talking about land use. And if you're doing all three of those, but you're not talking about where equity and environmental justice come in, then like we might as well not even be having the conversation. So one of the things that Climate Plan does is we try and bring together a wide range of stakeholders that can help create policy that's like more holistic, more well-rounded. Also, because we're statewide, we work a lot and bringing different regions together as well, because as everyone knows, Sacramento, Fresno, and San Diego all have completely different needs. And let's not even start talking about the Bay Area and LA. Like, I mean, it is just this wide range of issues related to to climate. And so one of the things the organization that I lead does is just try and bring as many people together in a room to have conversations about how to advance policy. So that's what I do in my 9 to 5. But before that, and on all the outside hours, I've been a community organizer in South Sacramento around environmental justice issues for about the last 10 to 12 years, really trying to work on the ground in South Sacramento to figure out how we can impact and improve our environment and climate there. I do climate change work and environmental justice work because to me, it gets to the heart of all the other isms. I have a social justice background. Family has been involved in many social justice issues. And I just think we can talk about criminal justice reform, but I just want to make sure that people in my neighborhood can also breathe. We can talk about access to making sure that people can engage in public meetings and public institutions, but if people in South Sacramento don't have a bus that they can ride to get downtown to go to a city council meeting, then that's where we need to start. It's not about how accessible city council meetings are, or it's not about what subjects they're talking about, but I'm can we just get there? And so I think environmental justice and climate justice, it really is the underlining undercurrent issue for me that brings me the most joy and satisfaction, because it's just, can we breathe? Do we have clean water? Are communities safe? Are they livable? And then then we can start talking about all of the other isms, all of the other things going on. I also think that it's a really interesting nexus that happens when you look at you can look at immigration, and you can look at how an influx of people trying to immigrate are related to climate issues that are happening in those countries. Crops aren't growing at the same consistency, speed, or quality that they used to be. And so farming is drying up in countries. And because of economics, people have to move and have to leave. There's so many things that climate change is connected to and climate policy is connected to, that for me, it's just one of the most yummy and rich issues to work on. And then I think Todd did a great job at outlining in Sacramento, just how ripe the opportunity is and how the county and the city are moving in direction to really advance climate change or advance climate policy. Okay, I'm going to try and that's what I could do off the cuff. Now, let me see if I can try and get my presentation up one more time. And also, I would love if this was interactive. So if folks have questions, we can also do that. I think it's going to work this time, you guys. I feel it in my bones. Look at that. All right, but also I said most of this already. So Todd, you're nodding. You can see the presentation. All right, so that's me, Naila, Executive Director of Climate Plan. Now let me see if I can figure out how to move the presentation. There we go. So this is pretty much reiterates who we are, but I want to show this map because it shows some of our partners and where some of them are located. So as an organization, we take a two-pronged approach. We do regional work. So we are intimately involved in climate action plans that are happening in different parts of California. One of the things we like to do is get people from different regions in the same room to talk to each other, because there's usually very ripe conversations that are happening. But we also have some statewide partners. One of our closest partners, and is actually on our advisory board, is like the American Lung Association, because we want to make sure that public health is also a part of the conversation as well. So these are some ways that we engage. A lot of clunky, boring planning processes. And I mean, really, I would say 4 of these plans all do the same thing with like one different statute or region, which is something that we're actively working towards. But just to run through them really super fast. The scoping plan is the California Air Resources Board's major plan around emissions reductions. The Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or we like to call it CAPTI, is the transportation system's new framework to create more holistic policy about our transportation infrastructure. Then every funding program, every road, everything that's built in California has to go through a guidelines process. And many of those are through the California Transportation Commission's guidelines process. There's SB 743, which is just, I mean, it's just complicated, you guys. It's just to try and do the right thing around climate. I don't know why we have to have so many hither thous and wear out in statutes, but 743 is this complicated piece of legislation around development and measuring emissions, we'll just say. I'm botching that, but like Google will get you better than I will. General plans, which I think, climate action plans, which Sacramento is in the process of updating their general plan right now. We've been engaging in climate action plans, which Todd talked about, the counties as well. Then we have regional transportation strategies, sustainable community strategies, which are created by locally SACOG. SACOG just completed theirs, I want to say last year, if not 2 years ago, but are already working on the next update. We like to say that they were just adopted, but it's such a continuous process that we're always in conversations about how to update our regional transportation plans. And then we also do development of local advocacy agencies. This is how complicated and convoluted I mean, how many plans are listed here in processes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plans. And when I tell you this doesn't even scratch the surface of what it means to advocate for climate change and climate policy. I mean, it is a complicated landscape out there. And so like on a statewide scale, these are just the agencies that we're coordinating with often. Hold on, let's go back. So common things that we're always hearing when we're talking to folks about just how to advance policy and what's needed are: 1, setting ambitious vehicle miles traveled reduction goals and greenhouse gas reduction goals. We have goals that are set that are really ambitious for greenhouse gas emissions. We don't see those for vehicle miles traveled. So what that means, like in layman's terms, is right now we're not really tracking how long people are driving in their cars, right? Vehicle miles traveled. We know that the longer people stay in cars, and most of the time it's single occupancy vehicles, the longer that they're staying in those cars, we're staying in those cars alone, the worse we're doing for our emissions. And until we start really getting intentional about the way that we plan like land use and the way that we're building our communities, it's just going to get worse because we're going to have people in cars for longer. And you'll hear some folks say, well, we have electric vehicles coming, which is good and will reduce some of the emissions, but electric vehicles are heavy. They're hard on our roads. We have to figure out charging. There's not really an equitable process for getting cars transitioned. And so it's really important to make sure that not only are we talking about reducing emissions, but we're really talking about doing VMT reduction. Another thing that we hear a lot and that we try and advocate for is amplifying community and environmental justice voices in all phases of the process. I'm sure anybody who's been doing any type of public work has been hearing this for years. I like to say, I think all the agencies understand the childcare translation and paying people and having food arguments, but now we need to figure out, like, what does the next phase look like? What does it actually mean to incorporate people into the planning processes? And I have some fun ideas around that, including like creating advisory councils, or and project teams hiring community representatives to be a part of the project team. So when you guys are meeting about a particular plan in a neighborhood, the community person is also invited to those meetings and can relay that back to the community group. Another common theme is around progress reports, accountability, and flexibility. And this is one of the biggest sticking points. I love this state. I love this state so much. And you'll hear so often that like California is the most ambitious. California has set all of these plans. We have great targets, like California is leading the way. But most of these plans are pretty plans that sit on shelves. Rarely are we actually being intentional about going back and reporting progress on those plans or being accountable to those plans. We update them, like the RTPs are a great example, the regional transportation plans. Every 5 years, we have to update it. And it wasn't until a few years ago that we actually created legislation where we have to like do progress reports on how well we're actually meeting those goals. Isn't that crazy? Like we create these ambitious plans and rarely are we actually figuring out then how do we implement them? How are we accountable to them? And how do we know if we're even following them? And so I apologize because this is just like the general presentation that we give. So I'm going to link it to you guys in a second, a little bit more to why I enjoy like having this conversation with public health folks. But some of the questions that I think we really have to like start honestly asking ourselves is, can we reduce our emissions, improve our climate without impacting most folks' everyday lives? I think an inverse argument to this is some folks' lives can be positively impacted by a lot of the changes that also would benefit our emissions or get us to our emissions reduction goals. Next question that I think we honestly have to start asking ourselves is, how do we ensure that people from historically discriminated communities are not overburdened? I think about this every day as I have conversations about moving to an electric future. We already saw the increase in gas prices, right? So what's going to happen as demand for gas goes down because more people are buying electric vehicles, people who can afford it. And then we have low income folks who can't afford electric vehicles that are going to continue to drive gas cars as gas prices goes up. And right now we don't have a really good funding structure for electric vehicles to help pay for our roads. We use our gas tax. And so our roads will be paid for by folks who can't afford electric vehicles. And I just don't understand how this isn't the forefront of most conversations. But I think we need to start thinking intentionally about how do we ensure that people from historically discriminated communities are not overburdened by this climate future that we need to live in. And then the other thing that is one of my big criticisms of just the whole climate change, climate mitigation, climate policy realm is the doom and gloom of it all, right? And so I started this saying like, I come into this really climate pessimistic today, but like, there's a way to talk about what our goals are that is completely around innovation, completely around equity, completely around like building this like future that is like that we all would actually probably want to live in. I think this is the end. Okay, so let me just stop a screen share. And so I think what that looks like, right? To like not be pessimistic, but like, and why public health professionals really need to be a part of the conversation in terms of climate change is we're talking about like reconnecting communities. When I talk about vehicle miles traveled, one of the easiest ways to decrease vehicle miles traveled are to like build in communities, make sure that people don't have to drive far, make sure that more people have access to healthcare, to grocery stores, to their schools, to high quality education. Like, it's not, I mean, that's not like to me, that doesn't feel like that should be like a really heavy argument. But when we talk about setting vehicle miles traveled targets, then we'll have debates about that for ages. But if we talk about like making sure that we're building communities so that everybody is driving less and has access to things that they need within like a walkable, drivable distance, like I think we can get way more people on board. When we talk about like decarbing houses and making sure that homes have, well, my mother will actually argue to the death for her gas stove. I really don't know how we're going to take gas stoves away from people, but there is an argument to be had about like air quality inside of your home being better. There's a quality to be able to like lower a bill or only have to pay an electric bill and not have to pay a gas bill anymore. One less bill to actually have to manage and pay. Like there's a way to talk about our climate future in a way that's really positive. And I think as we talk about, and public health professionals are actually some of the people that I've seen are able to do that the best, and able to like make the connections between like living in a home with a gas stove and how that air quality and living in that home and breathing in those fumes is not healthy. And how like building communities where people can walk and have people have access to outside is better for well-being and better for mental health. There's just so many rich opportunities, I think, to work together and to coordinate. That yeah, I just while like it can feel really down and daunting, I think working together to advance some of these issues can be really helpful. And so that's all that I had prepared. I think, are we doing questions now? Or I'm not sure who I kick it to.
Thank you so much. I love your passion around this work and everything that you're doing, Naila, related to really bringing the health and racial equities to the forefront of this conversation. So thank you so much. What we're going to do is we are going to have Q&A for any questions that have come up. I believe there's one right now in there. And what will happen is if you guys could type your questions into Q&A, and then Melissa Ricks will read the questions for our panelists. So thank you so much. Again, both speakers, you guys did a great job. And now it's time to get your questions answered, everybody.
Okay, so the first question I do see in the Q&A box, Robin, would these help with carbon monoxide poisoning?
Can I ask for clarification? I'm not sure what the these in that sentence was about, what that question was about. Was it a specific topic or was it like related to the gas stove conversation or?
Let's see if we get any more questions in there and
Right.
if Robin can clarify.
I mean, fundamentally, from a indoor air quality perspective, we know we've seen all the studies, well, not all the studies, but a lot of those studies that show natural gas in the home creates a really poor air quality situation. And so I think Naila made that point. We didn't go deep into what all the components of that indoor air quality are, but certainly.
She says the monitor in the houses and for cars.
Yeah, it would definitely help. Definitely help. Like, there's still other factors, but that's when I think that is one of the places where like public health professionals could be good advocates, especially around carbon monoxide poisoning.
So the next question, thank you. Next question says, has the pandemic contributed to your conversations about climate change? And if they have, in what ways?
I will say absolutely. From my kind of lens as a planner, in the early days of the pandemic, we were all told, go home, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right? Everybody remembers that. And when we were all at home and working from home or doing what we do, and when we would venture out, we would see hardly anybody on the road. And what that means from a VMT perspective that Naila touched on, vehicle miles traveled, nobody's driving as much as they were. We saw improved air quality as a result of that. And that means, there's no tailpipe emissions or much reduced tailpipe emissions. And if there's a way to show that things like telework on a regular basis can help reduce those emissions, why aren't we all advocating for that? And it's something that the county has done. We've got a new telework policy, but what does it mean for the private sector? Are different businesses doing that? Those that don't require in-person work, can they go to a telework situation? That's one example.
Yeah, and I'll absolutely say, yeah, the same thing. People being, people, especially in probably like the first 6 weeks, where it was that noticeable decrease in pollution, where people could just see clearer outside, and we could easily contribute that to driving. I mean, there was a lot of momentum there. I think also too, when the wildfires hit, and people were not able, I mean, we couldn't go outside, but also even if we did have alternative places to go, people couldn't, we weren't driving to work. And so you're just looking outside of your window. And I think in the Bay Area, they had those like that orange sky picture is something that like is burned into my mind. I think people really realize like, oh, like it's not something that you can work away. It's not something that we can just continue to ignore. So I think this wildfire season mixed with the pandemic really, really shined a light on the importance of climate change. And I think the other thing I'll say is from an advocacy standpoint, a lot of folks that then were like shut into their homes, and there was the idea like, oh, well, walk more in your neighborhood, go to parks. Some people didn't have those. And so I think we were able to really use that as an opportunity to shine light on, well, we need better planning for some of these neighborhoods because people don't have access to a park or can't just go for a walk and a stroll in their neighborhood. And so I hate to say like it's been an opportunity to really shine light and capitalize on some of the issues that we've been trying to shed light on for a while.
Absolutely agree with that, Naila. And I didn't touch on this in my presentation, but one of the components of the environmental justice element really speaks to what you just said about, what are the facilities, the amenities, the even the active transportation components, the bike, pedestrian trails, sidewalks, even sidewalks, something as basic as a sidewalk is missing in a lot of places. So.
All right, our next question. How does solar, gas, and electricity work together?
Well, I am not a utility engineer. However, I will say that we can reduce a significant amount of the emissions associated with natural gas by transitioning to electrification. That gets to the indoor air quality issue that we talked about previously. From a solar, if we're talking about large scale solar farms that are tied to the larger electrical grid, which those are happening, those are existing, and there are several proposed in the county area. That helps to clean the energy portfolio, for example, for SMUD, to help them get to the zero carbon goal of 2030. If we're talking about smaller scale solar, for example, on a residential building or a commercial building, that can also provide a cleaner energy source that also has emissions reduction benefits.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Not a utilities professional, but I will say, as the transition is something though that needs to happen, but also needs to be very thoughtful, because it's similar to like my cars and gas conversation. We just need to make sure that the burden isn't placed on folks who can't afford to electrify their homes automatically, or communities that aren't given solar farms or connected to the grid. So there just has to be intentionality as we move through these transitions.
And I would add on to that, the folks at SMUD who we've been talking to as we've developed the climate action plan, we've acknowledged the need for a much more robust incentive program that is actually prioritizing those folks that Naila just mentioned, because it is very costly. It can be very costly depending on the vintage of the housing stock to retrofit to achieve electrification. So that's an excellent point.
All right, next question. What can we do as consumers and also as public health professionals to move these climate change problems in California that have been sitting on the shelves?
I'd say my first response to that would be education. It's one thing for me as I do this as my daily job to understand it. It's another for kind of the average citizen. I really like the question you asked at the beginning of your presentation, Naila. What's everybody's, on a 1 to 10 scale, what's your exposure, what's your understanding to this topic? I think that, we hear it on a regular basis from environmental advocates, and that doom and gloom perspective can turn a lot of people off really quickly. And I'm not trying to get political about it, but there are certainly political aspects of the climate change conversation. I think the more that we focus on the economics of it, how it can be economically beneficial, how it can be beneficial from a public health perspective, trying to get to the positive messaging can go a long way. And advocacy takes a number of avenues, I think. And Naila, you're probably better suited to talk about this than I am. But I will say, peer-to-peer advocacy is one thing. Going to electeds is another. And sometimes we need that other to be really effective.
Yeah, I can just piggyback off of that and say, for me, when I show up at city council, they already know what I'm going to say and they write me off. And I won't say they write me off, but they're like, okay, here we go. VMT, GHG reduction. Okay, blah, 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 equity, blah, blah, blah. But when public health professionals show up and we engage new folks and new people are joining the conversation, and it's like, I'm not just talking about it from an environmental justice standpoint, but I have folks that are talking about it from a public health standpoint. We have folks who are talking about it from an economic standpoint. It just makes the conversation richer. And I think some of the things that I know that intimidate people from really engaging are also just how complicated the issues sound. And that's one of the reasons why I try to make it really simple. Like GHG reduction, VMT reduction, literally just mean we want to build communities where people can walk to what they need to. Like we can overcomplicate it, but we can also really simplify some of the concepts. We just want to make sure that people are driving cars. If people are driving cars, that those cars are clean and that they have access to the best cars for them and the environment. Like the concepts can get really complicated. Don't let that discourage you. Like wherever you can make the connections and also just include in your advocacy that climate change is also a factor, I think is really important. A side campaign that I've been working on is with the Sacramento Bee, when they write articles to say, and you can link this to climate change by saying X, Y, and Z. Like every article can literally have a line in it that says, and this is how climate change affects this, because I think people silo the issue when really, the air we breathe, the water we drink is a part of everything that we do. And so we really need to amplify that.
All right, we got about 5 minutes left. Let's see the next question. Could climate change possibly contribute to future pandemics or disease spread? If so, is that part of the conversation that addressing climate change is a positive?
So I don't have a good answer for you for that, but what I will say, early on when it was still the early days of the pandemic and we weren't sure what was happening, one of the things that people were pushing back on is the idea of density. And they were saying, because you're trying to force people to live too closely together, and because of that, this virus has the ability to spread further. And it was one of the first kind of information like campaigns that we had to go against. And so I think while I can't answer if it will be the cause, what I can say is it could be what helps get us out of it. I mean, and similar to the idea that like, if we're being intentional about the way that our communities are built, what people have access to, if we're intentional about the way that we're building our communities and the way that we're thinking about like air quality, and we're making sure that like people can breathe easier, people have access to parks, we make sure that like people are living in neighborhoods and there's more community built there. Like all of the solutions, I can't say will help prevent it, but it will make it easier and will help us get out of it sooner.
This is Linnanne. I'm not able to type in the Q&A, but I do have a question for you specifically, Naila. You talked about bringing people to the table, consumers that are affected by these policy changes and the climate work that is being done. And, you know, it is definitely a challenge sometimes to get people to the table, especially that have limited transportation, have other needs that are greater than in their life than participating in meeting with us to inform us more so. How would you suggest best practices to get people at the table that we need to have there? Because I agree that it's very important.
So this is where my organizing hat comes in. And I have been really fortunate to be a part of some radical, and just like not radical in the wild way, but just like some really transformative organizing campaigns. I have seen in Modesto, we're working with a group, and with healthcare professionals, what we ask them to do is there's like a sign that's in the office of like one of their public health departments that just says like, while you're waiting, call in and leave a voicemail about your experience with X, Y, and Z. So people who are receiving WIC checks while they're waiting for their appointment, they just like, and the receptionist would say like, oh, hey, while you're waiting, if you can, you know, call this line and just like leave a 2-minute about your experience. And then the advocates were able to take that and compile that and give that to elected officials. I think there's just so many opportunities, especially within like the public health realm. And I know that you guys have a lot of like laws and parameters around what you can do and share, but people are seeing you guys, people trust public health professionals. And so as much as like we're talking about climate change as also being a contributing factor for some things, the more helpful it will be in terms of the education. And I think there are just other opportunities like the sitting and calling. I think the education piece, once people are really understanding and grasping it, they can better access those spaces themselves. I think there's letter writing campaigns, postcard campaigns that we can do, and all of the wonderful, same yummy stuff that's available. I don't want to take too much time.
I second that, and I will acknowledge I need to hop off. I have another meeting to go to. Busy day for me. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'll follow up if there's any other details people need.
Thank you both so much. We really appreciate everything you've shared with us today, and I'm excited for our future, knowing that we have such experts that are working on this. And for all the participants, we will be sending out recordings of these presentations, as well as we will be requesting the slide decks from our presenters so that we can send those out as well. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you, Naila.